On the night of September 14th, 1883, a Tucker County, West Virginia deputy sheriff named Amos Lace rode to the upper Dry Fork of the Cheat River on a complaint that had been brought to the county seat in Parsons by a farmer named Harlan Bowers, who had traveled 12 miles down the valley to report that there was something happening at the Crane settlement on the upper drainage that he believed the county needed to know about. Bowers was not a man who traveled 12 miles on a September night without sufficient reason, and Lace, who knew him as a reliable and level-headed witness, took the complaint seriously. What Lace found at the Crane settlement that night, and what he subsequently documented in a report that has been in the Tucker County Circuit Court records in Parsons since 1883, and in a private letter to the circuit court judge that has been in the judge's family papers at West Virginia University's Special Collections in Morgantown since 197, was not a crime. The circuit court reviewed the report and the letter and found nothing that rose to the level of a criminal statute violation. Under the laws of the state of West Virginia in 1883, the matter was noted, the file was created, and the file was closed. It has been closed ever since in the way that certain files in certain mountain county courthouses stay closed. Not actively sealed, not restricted, not suppressed, simply left in a filing cabinet where it has accumulated the particular silence of things that were written down and then decided not to need further attention. The file is in Parsons. It is accessible. The letter is in Morgantown. It is accessible. Together they describe, from the perspective of a deputy sheriff with no particular framework for what he was looking at, and a circuit court judge with more framework than he wanted, what the Crane settlement on the upper Dry Fork had been doing on the night of September 14th, 1883, and had likely been doing, by Lace's and the judge's combined assessment, for considerably longer than that. Before we begin, drop your location in the comments and tell me what time it is where you are. Amos Lace rode to the upper Dry Fork on a September night in 1883 because a farmer thought the county needed to know. The county decided it did not need to do anything about what it knew. I want to know where you are sitting when you hear why. Before reaching what Lace found on the night of September 14th, it is worth establishing what the Scots-Irish dissenting religious tradition actually consisted of, because the Methodist minister's explanation, archaic liturgical elements preserved orally, is the most historically grounded interpretation of what Lace described, and understanding it makes the notation about the fire more, rather than less, significant. The Highland Scots-Irish, who settled the Appalachian Mountains in the 18th century, brought with them a set of religious practices that had been shaped by centuries of persecuted minority faith in Scotland and Ireland, practices that included forms of worship predating the Reformation, elements of the Celtic Christian tradition that had survived through folk practice rather than institutional transmission, and specific liturgical forms that had been maintained orally in isolated communities for so long that their original context had been partially lost, while their forms survived intact. What resulted in the most isolated mountain communities of the Appalachian Highlands was a kind of religious practice that was genuinely ancient, not a recreation of old forms, not a deliberate archaism, but an actual survival in living oral tradition of worship practices that the mainstream Protestant denominations had left behind centuries earlier. A Tucker County deputy sheriff in 1883 would not have had any framework for recognizing such a practice. He would have seen something unfamiliar and powerful and beyond his vocabulary to characterize, and he would have done exactly what Amos Lace did, written two documents, one official and one private, and put the difference between them in the private letter. Tucker County, West Virginia in 1883 was a young county, organized in 1856, still in the process of establishing the institutional infrastructure that a county requires, and in the particular condition of a mountain county that had come through the Civil War, with the specific fractures that the Virginia split had produced. The Cheat River drainage and its tributaries, the Dry Fork, the Shavers Fork, the Blackwater, ran through some of the highest and most isolated terrain in the state, country where the ridges ran above 4,000 feet, and the hollows between them were deep enough that the communities in them had developed social and religious patterns that were distinct from anything visible at the county seat 12 miles away. The Crane settlement on the upper Dry Fork had been there since the 1840s, when a man named Ezra Crane had come from Hardy County with his household and a distinctive set of religious convictions that he had developed, as best the sparse documentary record allows reconstruction, out of a combination of primitive Baptist doctrine and the older traditions of dissenting Scots-Irish mountain faith that had been working their way through the Appalachian Highlands since the late 18th century. The community that had formed around the Crane family by 1883 was small, 15 to 18 adults and their children, occupying 3 adjacent properties, and had developed over 40 years of isolation from the surrounding county's mainstream religious life into something that had no formal name and that Lace in his report described only as the Crane Church, though there was no church building and no ordained minister and no recognized denominational affiliation. Harlan Bowers's complaint, which Lace recorded in his report, was specific in its description of what had concerned the farmer. He had been riding past the Upper Dry Fork Hollow Road late on the evening of September 13th, the night before Lace's arrival, and had heard sounds from the Crane properties that he described in the complaint log as not consistent with normal evening activity, and that had frightened his horse enough that he had taken a different route home. He was not able to describe the sounds specifically, or was not willing to in the formal complaint. He said only that they were sounds he had not heard before in 30 years of riding that road, and that whatever was producing them was something he felt the county should investigate. Lace arrived at the Crane settlement at approximately 10 o'clock on the night of September 14th. He had not announced his visit. He approached from the lower end of the hollow road, on foot and without a lamp, and observed the settlement from a position outside the tree line before making his presence known. He observed this, a gathering of the full community in the cleared area between the 3 main structures, with a fire burning at the center, a substantial fire, larger than a normal outdoor hearth fire, contained in what appeared to be a purpose-built stone circle. All of the community's adults were present. Several of the older children were present. The gathering was in progress when Lace arrived and had been in progress by the evidence of the fire and the condition of the participants for some time before his arrival. His official report describes the gathering in general terms that are careful and deliberately restrained in the way that an official report from a deputy who is describing something he has no legal category for tends to be careful and deliberate. He describes a community engaged in collective worship of a form that he was not familiar with, involving extended singing, physical movement that he describes as not the dance of entertainment but movement of a more purposeful character, and a spoken element from one of the community's elders, an old man he identified as Elijah Crane, Ezra's surviving son, then approximately 70 years old, that he describes as a recitation of a text I did not recognize and could not write down as it was spoken in, language that may have been partially in a form I did not know. In a language he did not know, Lace was a Tucker County man of Scots-Irish descent. He would have been familiar with English and with the King James Bible. The language Elijah Crane was speaking was something he could not place. The private letter to the circuit court judge written by Lace 4 days after his visit addresses this element more directly. He wrote to the judge, "I have thought about what I heard Elder Crane speaking, and I believe it was not a foreign language in the sense of French or German, but rather an older form of something. Not words I could identify, but with a rhythm and a pattern that made me think of Bible language, the way the Old English of the King James sounds different from how we speak now, but is recognizable as the same root. What Elder Crane was speaking was like that, something with the quality of very old language, the meaning of which I could not follow. I have asked the Methodist minister in Parsons about it, and he told me that some of the older dissenting sects in the mountains preserved forms of worship that included archaic liturgical elements from centuries past, including fragments of pre-Reformation prayer forms that had been passed down orally through the Scots-Irish tradition. He thought this was the most likely explanation. I am writing this to you because the official report does not contain it, and I believe you should have it for your judgment of the matter. The circuit court judge's judgment was that no statute had been violated, that the Crane community was exercising the religious practice protected by the state constitution, and that the matter required no further action. The letter is a private document that the judge retained in his family papers and that reached the West Virginia University archive as part of a broader donation of the judge's papers in the 1970s. The Methodist minister's explanation, archaic liturgical elements from the Scots-Irish dissenting tradition preserved orally across generations, is the most historically grounded interpretation of what Lace observed, and it is consistent with what ethnomusicologists and religious historians studying the Appalachian Highlands have documented about the survival of pre-Reformation religious forms in isolated mountain communities throughout the 19th century. But the official report also contains one more element that neither the Methodist minister's explanation nor the circuit court's determination fully addresses. At the end of his account of the gathering, before he described making his presence known to the community, Lace wrote, "I observed the gathering for approximately 40 minutes before I stepped out of the tree line. During that time, I noted that the fire in the stone circle did not behave as a contained fire of that size should behave in the conditions present that night. I am not prepared to characterize specifically what I mean by this. I note it because I observed it, and the report should contain what I observed. The fire did not behave as a contained fire should behave. Lace was not prepared to characterize specifically what he meant. The circuit court judge read this notation and apparently chose not to ask Lace to clarify. The file was closed. The community on the Upper Dry Fork continued to live in the hollow and to practice whatever it practiced, and to be left alone by the county, which was what mountain communities in Tucker County in 1883 generally wanted and generally received. The Crane settlement appears in the 1890 census, the 1900 census, and the 1910 census. After 1910, the settlement's distinct household grouping does not appear in the Dry Fork drainage in any census. Whether the community dispersed, aged out, or simply stopped being identifiable as a distinct community in the county's growing general population is not established in any document that has been found. There is one element of the Crane settlement's subsequent history that the official records document and that rounds out the picture of what Lace witnessed and what the county decided to do with what he witnessed. The Crane settlement appears in the 1890, 1900, and 1910 censuses, which means that the county's decision to take no action in 1883 was a decision to leave the community in place and undisturbed for at least 27 more years. This is not surprising. The circuit court judge reviewed the report and the letter and found no statute violated, and mountain communities in Tucker County were left to manage their own religious practice without county interference as a general matter. What is notable is what happened in the years after Lace's visit, as recorded in the Methodist Circuit Minister's notebooks for the Parsons Circuit, which are in the Tucker County Historical Society archive. The circuit minister, the same man Lace had consulted after his September 1883 visit, visited the Crane settlement twice in the 1890s as part of his circuit duties, attempting to establish a relationship with the community that might bring it into the orbit of his denomination. Both visits were politely received and produced no change in the community's practice. The minister noted in his notebook after his second visit that the Crane community's worship forms were among the oldest he had encountered in his circuit work, and that Elijah Crane had shown him, in a brief conversation, materials that the minister described as written texts of considerable age in a hand and a language I did not recognize, from which Elder Crane read portions of the gathering liturgy. Written texts of considerable age in an unrecognized hand and language. This is consistent with the archaic oral tradition explanation in that it provides a potential source for the preserved liturgy. It is also the detail that, combined with Lace's notation about the fire, makes the Crane settlement's practice something that the standard historical categories are not quite adequate to contain. The stone circle is likely still there under 40 years of second-growth forest. The hollow in the upper Dry Fork drainage of Tucker County, West Virginia, is still there. The Cheat River still runs below it. The Parsons Courthouse still stands 12 miles away, and the file is in it, and the file is accessible, and the file contains the one observation that Amos Lace wrote down because the report required it. The Upper Dry Fork still runs through it. The West Virginia University Special Collections in Morgantown holds the judge's family papers, including Lace's private letter. The Tucker County Circuit Court records in Parsons hold the official report. Both are accessible to any researcher who requests them. Here is the question that the Crane settlement leaves behind, and it is about the Lawman rather than the community. Amos Lace rode to the Upper Dry Fork on a September night because a farmer thought the county needed to know. He observed for 40 minutes before making his presence known. He filed an official report that was careful and deliberately restrained, and he wrote a private letter that said what the official report declined to say. He noted that the fire did not behave as a contained fire should behave, and he declined to characterize specifically what he meant. He was a Tucker County deputy sheriff with no particular theological training and no particular framework for what he was looking at, and he left the Crane settlement that night having witnessed something that required him to write two documents instead of one, the official account and the honest one, because the official account was not large enough to hold what he had observed. What had he observed? The Methodist minister in Parsons offered an explanation that satisfied the circuit court judge. Does it satisfy you? The archaic liturgical elements of the Scots-Irish dissenting tradition, preserved orally, spoken in a form of very old language by an elder in a mountain hollow, account for most of what Lace described. They do not account for the notation about the fire. Lace wrote it down because he observed it, and the report should contain what he observed. The report contains it. The report is in Parsons in the Tucker County Circuit Court records, accessible to researchers. The letter is in Morgantown at West Virginia University Special Collections. Two documents describing the same night from two different distances, the official document and the honest one, the outer room and the inner room. Tell me in the comments what you think Amos Lace saw in the stone circle on the night of September 14th, 1883. The Tucker County Historical Society archive also contains, in the circuit minister's notebooks, a single entry from the autumn of 1901 that describes a final visit to the Crane settlement, the third visit, and apparently the last contact between the circuit ministry and the community. The minister wrote that on his arrival he had found the settlement in normal order, with the community present, but that when he had asked to observe one of their gatherings, a request he had made on his prior visits and had been granted, Elder Crane had told him, politely and without elaboration, that he did not think that would be appropriate anymore. The minister recorded this and did not press for a reason. He wrote in his notebook, Elder Crane's manner when he said it was not unfriendly. It was the manner of a man communicating a decision that had been made and was not subject to discussion. I did not press him. I rode back to Parsons. I do not believe I will return. He did not return. The circuit ministry records show no further contact with the Crane settlement after 1901. The settlement appears in the 1910 census and not afterward. Whatever the community was doing in the years between 1901 and 1910, and whatever produced the end of the settlement's documented presence in the Dry Fork drainage after 1910, is not in any record that has been found. Tell me whether the Methodist minister's explanation is sufficient, and tell me what it does with the notation about the fire. If these official reports and private letters, and the things that lawmen observe on September nights and record in two documents because one document is not large enough to hold everything they observed are the reason you found this channel, subscribe and ring the bell. The report is in Parsons, in the Tucker County Circuit Court records, accessible to researchers. The letter is in Morgantown at West Virginia University Special Collections. Two documents describing the same night from two different distances, the official document and the honest one, the outer room and the inner room. The letter is in Morgantown. The hollow in the upper Dry Fork drainage of Tucker County, West Virginia is still there. The Cheat River still runs below it. The Parsons Courthouse still stands 12 miles away, and the file is in it, and the file is accessible, and the file contains the one observation that Amos Lace wrote down because the report required it. Tucker County is still there. The Dry Fork of the Cheat River is still there. The community that Amos Lace observed on September 14th, 1883, has been gone from the documentary record since 1910, and what they were doing in the years between his visit and their disappearance from the census is not documented anywhere. Elder Crane's written texts of considerable age, in an unrecognized hand and language, are wherever the community took them. The stone circle is likely still in the upper Dry Fork hollow, under however many decades of forest. The hollow in the upper Dry Fork drainage of Tucker County, West Virginia is still there. The Cheat River still runs below it. The Parsons Courthouse still stands 12 miles away, and the file is in it, and the file is accessible, and the file contains the one observation that Amos Lace wrote down because the report required it. The fire did not behave as a contained fire should behave in the conditions present that night. Amos Lace was not prepared to characterize specifically what he meant. He wrote it down anyway. He wrote it down because the report should contain what he observed. This is the principle that runs through every document in this series where an official chose to record something they could not fully characterize. Perkins's additional statement about the wall writing, Doyle's description of the traps, Vance's 3 sentences at the hollow entrance. The document should contain what was observed. The characterization is secondary to the fact of the observation. Lace observed something about the fire that he could not explain, and he put it in the report because the report required it, and the report has been in Parsons since 1883, containing that observation, waiting for someone to ask what it meant. The Methodist minister in Parsons explained the language and the movement and the gathering as archaic. Scots-Irish liturgical tradition preserved orally, the explanation is historically sound. It does not explain why the fire in the stone circle did not behave as a contained fire should behave in the conditions present that night. Lace noted both things in the same document. The document is in Parsons. The explanation accounts for one of them. The other has been waiting in the report for 141 years without an account that satisfies.